Okay, well, it is 4 o'clock, so we will get started. Welcome to week number two for PPA 500. I'm glad that some of you came back for this week. Hopefully, we'll have everyone else coming in a few more minutes. So I think people will be trickling in for a while, but thank you for being here tonight. As I told you last week, we're very fortunate this evening to have Kelly Janicek from the University Library with us, and she will have the first half of class tonight where she will talk to you about doing research in public administration. Kelly is always very generous with her time, and thank you very much for being here, Kelly. She comes into all of our PPA 500 sections, been doing it for quite a while, and really introduces you to how you do research in public administration. One of the most useful sessions you will have throughout your entire time in the MPA program. So I made you a co-host, Kelly, and so I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon. I think it's still officially afternoon, depending on where you are. Um, 2, 4, 2, 4, 6. Okay. Um, I'm gonna go ahead and start. And if you have questions about what I do, don't be shy about putting it. I will try to monitor the chat with several windows open. Sometimes that doesn't work real well, but let me know. And if I come across clear enough, I'm in the library, and the worst place on campus for Wi Fi is in the library. I think there's too many people in here. That's what the problem is. But let me go ahead and start sharing and just kind of give you an idea of what we're going to cover this evening. Um, this is kind of a research methodology concept. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts. You'll get that in another class, but the ramifications of some of the things that are out there that make a difference. And there. I'm going to review some basic research basics. I'm always surprised at what people know and don't know, and I shouldn't be. Depends on what your exposure is to libraries. I'm going to talk about topic concepts because at one point you may have to do a research or in your job do some research. So, what kind of things you need to think about before you get started, which will save you a lot of time in the long run. I'm also going to talk about AI for research. Everybody's doing it, but there are things that aren't quite working yet, and you need to realize what you will hit when you do AI for research. I'm going to review sources, another way to save time. I'm going to talk about different types of sources. Specifically in PPA, you probably use more unique sources than what I would teach for other research people. Then we're going to start to discover information. That's what we do these days. It's kind of like a Google search. You throw what you've got against the wall and just see what trickles down that you might be able to use. And then I'm going to talk about basics of citations. Um, in doing research, you do need to cite your materials, and your program uses the Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association, APA, the seventh edition. Considering there's 63 different citing tools, I think it's by far superior because it shows you how to cite just about anything, including talking to people, TikTok, research articles, research papers, anything. So I want to make sure you understand some of the basics of it. Is there any questions at this point? Is it what you kind of expected this evening? I don't know. I want to turn on. Well, I'm gonna have to talking to myself. Just ignore me. And there it is. One of the things in research that one has to think about is developing a vocabulary. You're typing words into the computer, and it's not always understanding that play could be a theater production or it could be way children play in a playground. It doesn't always understand, it just looks for the word. So you need to think about your vocabulary, what's more precise, what might also be a synonym, that kind of thing. Sometimes as you're looking for things, you might discover another word you hadn't thought about that might work better. So be aware of your vocabulary that you're using when you're doing research. And then I'm going to talk more specific about conceptualize the topic. I get people who come to desk and say, I can't find anything on, but their topic is so big, I can understand why they can't find anything on. So you sometimes need to think about how big the topic is. Is there a subset within the topic? For example, you could do political science, or you could do public administration or public policy, which is a subset of political science. So thinking about it that way, is there something a little bit more precise I want? Sometimes it's so precise that you can't really find a whole lot. Um, I had someone ask me they wanted the relationship between theology and painted ponies. And yes, there are two articles in that topic, but there's only two articles on that topic. So sometimes it's too narrow focus. So sometimes you need to think about it. And when you start reading some of the literature that's out there, it might actually conceptualize your topic a little differently as you read things and determine more about it. People say, well, where do I start? I don't know. I don't know what to do. Sometimes going back to your textbook is sometimes the best place at this point to kind of get an idea of what you might want to think about. And I'm going to give you some other ideas as I go along that might help you understand things. The other thing is the computer is mathematical. So it uses what they call Boolean logic. So to refine a topic, you use words and. So both words need to be there. If you use not, say EU, not China, it would take all the times they talked about China out. So sometimes I don't use it that often, but sometimes you start finding all this stuff and it's like, ooh, that's very common. This is not really where I wanted to go. So I knot some words out and get rid of it. Probably the best thing that's out there right now are the filters or refine. We pay big bucks, a couple $1 million for our over 300 databases. What they provide for us are things like filters and refinements, and I will demonstrate some of those. Sometimes that's the best thing to get it more down to a usable pot. Not like 100,000, as you found in Google, or I got to the point where I was getting 8 million hits for environmental impact because they use the word for everything, but that wasn't the subject I was looking for. So sometimes filters help. If you want to expand your vocabulary, say you're using what's it good? EU, European Union, or you could do EU or European Union. That would get any variations of the words because the computer doesn't understand the EU and European Union are the same thing. So public policy or public administration, they're actually two different concepts a little bit. So sometimes the or will help you be able to search for both. My favorite one is phrase searching. Public administration are two words. You don't want it to default to all the words that have the word public in and all the words that have articles that have administration in them. Because by default, if you don't phrase search it with quotes around it, you will get all the articles that talk about public and administration. But if I say, quote, public administration, unquote, it will only look for that phrase, public administration. So in politics, there's a lot of phrases. United States. Another good example, you want to put it in quotes. So it actually finds those words right next to each other. That's a little computer cheat thing. You can do it in Google too, just so you know. My favorite are subject terms. They're more precise. I used to be able to show this example, but it's gotten too far off the page and I can't find it anymore. We were talking about environmental climate in California. And we put in those words, but we weren't finding anything until we looked for the subject environmental climate. And on the first page came up one about a bill the governor was pushing through the legislature about climate change in California. That was on environmental climate, but it didn't use those words. It was kind of what we were looking for exactly, but not using the words. But because the databases have a human, I hope still have a human, looking at all the words in the article, sometimes they define subjects that aren't really the words being used. I'm going to take a minute here and see if there's any questions. Um, I don't see anything in the chat. I don't see hands raised. Are we good? Do we understand some of these basic concepts? Okay, I got some thumbs up. That's good. Are there any questions? No thumbs down? Okay. Let me go back and see what else we can talk about here. Okay, so let's talk about understanding the topic or conceptualizing the topic. There are ways to understand your topic. There are subject encyclopedias, and in public policy and administration, there are several really good ones. There are broad ones like political science that define things. The advantage of a subject encyclopedia is it takes the topic, breaks it down to subtopics, gives you a little background, including a little bibliography of good sources at the end that would actually start your research. A librarian and I were talking today, and I'm doing this display on graphic novels, and I wanted the history from comics to comic books to graphic novels. And I said, I looked up the encyclopedia. I found one in the Journal of Popular Culture. She goes, What? What? Where's that? I need to know that. They're very good to understand topics and little 4 or 5 page concepts. Another thing we have is something we call annual reviews. These are journals. They are basically someone who's taking a topic and talking about its past and what they expect to do in its history. So it's kind of a new wave, kind of new topic concept kind of thing to look at. I don't get people who use it very often, more often in the sciences than the social sciences, but it's something you need to be aware that's out there for government and political science and public administration. There's a type of article called literature reviews, and they come in various ways. They kind of review the literature on the topic that's come published to date. It's a good way to get which ones were kind of the article. They kind of set up the tone of what this topic's going to be. There's also critical review articles that break it down and argue that this article didn't cover the subject well enough and this article did, and na 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 na. You don't find a whole lot of those, but they do exist. You need to be aware in your research who the authorship was. Because one of the best things to follow is you get a good article, you looked at who published it. Tracking that person and other publications and other articles they've written is a good way to get more information. Because usually we start writing in an area and we kind of take that area as far as we can take it. So we might do several articles on that one topic, but from different points of view or different subconcepts or whatever. So looking at authorship and finding out, excuse me, what's available is a good way. An example of this is Google Scholar. You can track an article, but you can see what else that author has written. It's a way to find relationships or discovering information, as we call it. You need to be aware of the publication, and I'll tell you why. This has become a very critical thing in the publishing world. There has been a real, what do I want to call this? Real work by authors to take over a journal that they're an editor of and then get all their buddies to publish in it. And then when people ask, if this is really a peer-reviewed article, a scholarly research, they cannot prove it because it really wasn't. Someone needed to get a publication, they published it for them. We've had several vendors, major publishers, take several of their journals down. We're talking thousands of journals down because they're finding that they have been basically taken over and not the quality that they expect their publication to be. There are a lot of what we call open access journals. And there are good open access journals and there are bad open access journals. There's the gold and green open access publications, and they are considered quality journals. They're just not published in paper. They're just only available on the web. And we have ways of letting you know what they are and how the quality of them and things like that. So if you're questioning what a publication is, the quality of it, that's something a librarian can help you do. I'm going to move along unless you have questions. I don't see any chat. Let's take a minute and talk about AI, artificial intelligence. Almost all our databases at this point have added artificial intelligence to their search bot. Has it helped us? No, we actually think they took a step back, but it's the reality of life today. The difference between a library database, Google Scholar, and what I call an AI generated search through a search engine or something you use is very different. And I want you to understand them. The library databases have taken a journal, if they each database is arranged by a topic or a discipline. They have found the journals that they think fits that topic or discipline, and they index it from volume one, issue one to the current issue. So it includes any article that they've published. There are some that will say we only partially say a business management may only do a partial indexing, but only those that fit public administration or the government sector of management. They are using AI, and I'll show you what I mean by that. But the reality is you get more stuff by using the library databases that we pay for, that you pay for. Google Scholar or Google is self-promoting. Specifically, Google Scholar is. It doesn't cover every journal. It's by author. So the author wants to get recognition. They will make sure their articles are mentioned in Google Scholar. It doesn't cover everything. It's peer reviewed or what they call scholarly publications. So in your discipline, you might have a lot more what I call trade or professional publications. And I'm going to talk about those in a minute. They won't show up in Google Scholar. So you're missing out. Meanwhile, the library databases would have gotten you that information. If you elect to use an AI bot and you go ahead and do a research, you need to realize it will find the stuff on Google Scholar, but will not find the stuff in the library databases because of the firewalls. We pay for that information. It protects against AI coming in and using it. They may use AI to present the data to you, but they don't allow AI to cross into their firewalls. Because you're paying for the service, they want to know that not everybody, you have to pay for their service. The other thing I want to mention, it's better for AI is better for generating a research online, kind of outlining what you want to do or help with the phrasing. That's where it's very strong at this point. It probably get to the point where we'll be able to find sources for you, but you need to realize that it really can't do that yet. We've had lots of examples where a faculty member calls us and says, the student's got this paper. And I looked at the bibliography and I can't figure out what they saw. What is this? Because AI feels that it has to answer the question. It will find an author who may have published in that area and a journal that may have published in that area and a title of the article that looks good. And they merge that together and create a citation that's not real because it feels like it has to answer it. May get there, but the problem is that it self-feeds itself. So it's now creating all these false citations that are now generated, and that's what you're going to find until it can be corrected for false information, that it's self-creating. You can try writing for a paper. There's some actually within the last couple months that have become better at that, but you have to really think about it critically and read it and make sure it makes sense and that it's real information and not something it just gathered up because it feels like it has to. I'm going to take a step out here and see if there's any questions about this, um, about AI, artificial intelligence, and the way it fits in the research realm today. You're not a chatty group. Um, I want to make sure you understand. That's all I see thumbs up. Okay, you're getting there. Thank you. Let me go back and share some more. Let me see what you're seeing here. My computer seems to have created its own AI thing, and it's got little jiggly things, and it does weird things. It has a very large time display. Yeah. I see one question. Okay, we're good. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to talk about different types of information because depending on what you're due or looking for, it may have to start with a type of information. It may save you a lot of time without having to do all sorts of other things. Um, Thank you. Let me know. Okay, articles are probably the most common information that you will seek. As a professional, what I talk about next, you might do as many of those as you do articles, but articles are probably the most common. That you can see they're good for trends, research, advice, commentary. They're usually the first choice, but they come in various subtypes. And I want to talk about the various types. The bottom of the screen, you see the Daily Telegraph, the Mirror, the Daily, the thing, what we call the rags, their checkout lane of the gas station, the grocery store. You know, I can't even tell you who the big person is on the front cover anymore. I mean, it used to be Brad and Jolene, and but it's not anymore. Libraries collect these for pop culture, but you better not be using them for your paper or any research. They're pop culture, unless you're doing something specific on pop culture. Um, but they're information types. What's more common is you might use news, like the newspaper that you see there on the conveyor belt. We have 15, 16 databases of various news types, um, media news, alternative newspapers, small town newspapers, major newspapers. They're good for finding the current stuff, what happened recently. Um, they may go into depth about a city council meeting and talk about what they talked about. They're good for that kind of information, the news. What you have now that I want to show this next one is the PA Times and Journal of the AMA, American Water Works Association. There are what I call trade or professional journals. These articles are not peer reviewed. Some may, but pretty much not. What they're more on, what is happening? How did we do that? How did we fail at that? How did we succeed at that? I have databases that allow you to pick trade or professional articles. They're very good. In the workplace, you might find these the most helpful. So I just want to make sure you understand that they exist out there. The gold standard are the scholarly or peer reviewed, like the public, I can't even see what it's called, the public American Public Administration Journal by the PPA. It is a scholar peer reviewed. It means the person did the research. They have a methodology. They have a outcome. They have graphs, tables, a bibliography, a literature review. Takes a while to do this. It isn't like your newspaper that got it out or your social media that got it out after it happened, or even your trades that get it out within the month. It takes time to do the research. Then they have to go through a peer review process. Colleagues who know the profession will read that article and determine if it's valuable, if it's accurate, do they have good citations, what are they missing? Only then will it be published. That's why some of the publishers who got hacked, for better word, when they take the status of the gold standard peer reviewed scholarly articles and they're finding out that's not what they are, they don't want to be responsible to the point that they've taken journals down now. If they find an article that made it through the peer review process and somebody questions the editor about it, they will go back and ask the author, okay, the data's not working. Someone else tried to recreate your research and it's not working. What's going on? If they admit that they falsified their information, the publisher will take that article down, and any other people who have published in any of their journals who cited that article that's considered bad, they will take those articles down too. If I have the journal in paper, I'll have the article for life, but if it's online, it's gone. So you can see why this is like the A++ paper. So it's a really kind of important piece of literature that's very considered very hardcore. As a professional, you may not use these as much. As a researcher working on things, you might. Come on. Other one that you might use more is what I call a report. I stuck books and reports together. They're like published on one topic one time. They're very good for history, background, and trends. The difference is you need to watch their editorial oversight or biased. So this American, I got things on my screen hiding things for me. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Go back. American Divided Recovery, College Have and Have Nots. That was put out by, it looks like the Department of Education that doesn't exist anymore. So it's a government publication. Until recently, the biggest publisher in our country was the United States government, and they had a lot of money behind it, and they did wonderful things. The current political has closed almost all of it down. They're no longer offering research grants to fund things in medicine, health, education, any of those areas. So the research has stopped. On top of that, there's a feeling that some of this article, American Divided Recovery, College Have Nots and Haves and Have Nots, probably talks about diverse groups. And so it's probably been cleansed or removed for that reason. Librarians are very upset about this, and you, as a citizen whose tax dollars went for these publications, should be upset too. There's a lot of librarians who are trying to save what they can, just so you know. And if you come across something you can't find currently, give us a call and we'll see if it's been placed in the save or set to try to save it. Um, Books, I think you're familiar with, but the other type of book is like the Sage Encyclopedia of Public Administration. Remember, I talked about how an encyclopedia might give you a good background to think your topic through. This is an example of one, and I'll show you how to find it in the future. People. Yes, that is a book. People. People are a good source of information. Somebody's eventually going to write it down. That's how it ends up in those other sources. But you might ask a person. Sometimes it's so current, it's pre-publication. It's good for history. All my colleagues, I've been here a while, they call me all the time and say, Kelly, what was this? What did we do? How did we get here? The history, because I know it. The events, I was there. That kind of thing. It's probably the least used. It's sometimes harder to find. It's social media is a good example of it, verbal. But in APA style, it shows you how to cite if you interview a person, if you call them on the phone, if you use TikTok, any way you used a person's media, their comments, and it wasn't published in the type of articles I talked about, a report, a book, a government information, that kind of thing. I'm going to talk about a lot of websites, if they're legitimate, well run policy, well run research. They should have it about us, and they should list all the people that work there and do the research. And they should give you ways of contacting them. That's why sometimes they say it's a little harder, because they may, as a student, they may not be reaching out to you if you try to make contact with them. But You can find out who the people are. You can then track them for authorship, so you can get the reports that they've written. So it's a good way to find more, discover more information. Yes, people are as important. The final one that I'm going to talk about is statistics. It's a little different. You have to get the data, which is getting harder and harder to get from our US government. Once you have the data, then you have to interpret it. A lot of them are time series. Um, I know you all know the biggest, longest running time series in the United States. It's done every 10 years. Does anybody want to guess what it is? Whoops, I want to go back.
The census.
That is correct. It's the census of population. There used to be 12 censuses. I think that's plural for census. I don't know. But there was at one point a census of government. And it was a good way for you in your job, in your area to get local and city and state data on things. Um, I don't know that it still exists because of what's going on, but this is an example of something from the state of California. They have state and local combined expenditures data. You need to realize that California has not owned they have outsourced their data for over 15 years because they couldn't afford to get it out to the public. So they outsource it. This one's from the Digest of Education Statistics and State and Local Government stuff. But I will show you a way to get to that kind of data. Okay. I'm going to stop. This is your chance to ask questions about all the pre stuff that I'm talking about. You know, what kind of articles, what kind of things exist, how to think about it, the various types of things that exist out there. Did anybody learn anything new? I always say the quotation marks is something new for a lot of people, but I don't know. No? Okay. I'm going to share again and keep going. Now we're going to discover some information. That's where we're going next. Okay. The library is huge. Like I said, we have over 300 databases. How are you going to know? What we have created for every program, major, is a research guide. And there is one for public administration. See the address? Note that it's a .com. You no longer can use a web address to confirm its legitimacy. We have software. LibGuides has software for us, so we can update this at the drop of a hat. If we had to wait for the university web person to allow us to update a page, it's 6 to 8 weeks. That doesn't work in library land. The information's got to be now. We want the good stuff. We don't want the fake news. We don't want the false news. So this is an example of what the homepage looks like, and we're going to go a little bit more depth on it. But the homepage, actually, we're going to talk about this more at the end. I have some guides to APA citing tools. So if you don't have the publication manual of the American Psychological Association 7th edition, and I highly recommend you buy a copy in paper. It's so much easier to use. I have 4, I think. There's these that'll kind of help you get some of the big stuff. Sometimes in your class, you might have to write an annotated bibliography. I've got examples of how to do that. And then we're going to talk about some of the rest of these things here. Let me escape this and go over to share this. I know you can't see what I'm sharing, but I'm going to share it here in a minute. Okay. This is the library homepage. These are all the databases are listed. We have a lot of programming. If you want the artificial intelligence panel on February 3rd from 4 to 5:30, it's a Tuesday during class, I'm sorry to say. Here at the library, we're doing a lot of stuff on artificial intelligence. because we're getting lots of questions about it. Here are the research guides. So you can go in, type in public administration. You didn't save the spot, and there it is. And here it is. The other things that are on this is how to chat with the library at any time. I'm going to mention that a couple different times. Do you see at the bottom of the screen the Ask a Librarian little tab? We don't go home and sleep. We allow you to ask us questions at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're doing your research, which we've discovered is the number one time for most people to write their papers worldwide. What it is a international co-op, and a librarian is on duty 24/7. So if you're struggling with something, go ahead and ask, type in, go ahead and ask the question. They will look at our stuff. A lot of the stuff is very universal, and we know about these databases. Um, they will help you the best they can. If they cannot help you because there's something unique to us, they will say we will make contact with the librarian. And the next business day that we're working, we will make contact with you to make sure everything is okay. Um, I usually man it from 11 o'clock on Monday mornings, and all my questions come from Britain, because guess what time it is in Britain? 1 to 2 a.m. in the morning. And some of those questions are really hard because they have different stuff than we do. If you're coming in from home, here's some access. If you're having access issues, here's a guide to tell you to think of what to do with your browser or whatever. You need to have single sign-on to access all the stuff. I'm already logged into my single sign-on. You can't see it. It's off another screen. The minute I do that, I leave it open because it then allows me to do everything else. Everything else is to get the sources. So one of the sources I've talked about first was subject encyclopedias. The lock on it means as long as you're enrolled at CSULB, you may use it. We're recording, you didn't hear this on the recording, but we have public access availability for 90 minutes. I recommend you come on a Saturday or Sunday. 90 minutes, you can come in and use any of our databases because we are a federal and state depository, and by our agreement, we have to be open to the public. But the vendors don't want to know that because then they would charge us for everybody. They charge us a lot because how many students we got. We don't want to charge for everybody in Long Beach. But what I'll do, let me just do a quick show because I never think about this. It will link you to the page that tells you that it's available because that's the way I have to show it. And then it'll link you. I have it in paper and online. COVID kind of made me double buy stuff. I want to reject none. And then it actually has a subject index, but it also gives me chapters. So maybe you're doing something on administration and society, street level bureaucracy and public administration. Here's a chapter on it. If I'd looked it up on the subject, it would have given me other things. It recommends other chapters. It shows you all the information to cite it. You can email it, download it. It goes through and gives me sources, background, a couple pages here. It's probably 4 or 5. The big thing at the end, it gives me references for more sources. Some of them are a little dated, but remember what I talked about? Look this person up. When did this article come out? Have they written anything since then? Okay. So that's a good way to find things, to understand your topic, to get the nuances from it. Let's see if you're going to keep up with me here. Yep. Okay. Because of how I went in. It automatically, ADA compliant, we had to make it so if I click on it, this screen will stay and it will go within the thing I clicked on. If I want to go back, you guys know how to do your left click and look at where you were and go back, jump back to where you were. Okay? Want to make sure you know that. We have databases that do the public administration type journals, trade publications, newspapers. We have those that do specifically public policy based articles or reports or whatever. Then we've got a couple that do probably the journal came out and it hasn't quite been indexed yet. We've got a couple of those. Looking at this, and later on, you're like, I don't remember what she talked about. Every little guy has an eye, and the eye tells you what it will help you find stuff on. Logically, something with the name Public Administration Abstracts would index public administration journals. That's why we bought it. Politics database, meanwhile, will do that plus all your policy and your political science and even international policy. It also has a subset of policy. It has a sub database in it called policy, and it does stuff in it. So you might want to look at for that. If you really want to work with the trades, your ABI Inform Complete is by far the best. It's an old database. It's been around since the early 70s. It has a lot of stuff in it. It's American Business Index, but I'm going to show you how to sneak out the stuff that might be more non-business oriented. I mentioned social index. I like that if you're dealing with people. I don't care if it's a park situation, recreation situation, elderly, kids, schools, anything that deals with people shows up in social index. It's a nice sociology, human, whatever, and it has some real good articles that you sometimes find helpful. Some of the same. The difference is academic search completes here. It's kind of a don't know where to start. Where is it going to be? It indexes at least 5 major journals from each discipline in it. So let's look at public administration abstracts. If you haven't been in here recently and you've been gone, it's changed. It's now AI and the screen is, I don't know. I'm biased. It's pretty crappy. So I am in public administration abstracts. I want to make sure. So remember I talked about using quotations, but maybe I want to see how much there is. So maybe I want to do something on recreation in a city or town or village. I don't know. See what we find. I got 39 hits. Remember, there aren't a whole lot of public administration journals, so it's always a smaller pot than all the other databases. I now can start fixing what I want. I can limit it by dates. I can limit it by, there's only 27 academic journals, 39. So there's a few other things. If I only want peer reviewed, because I really want the scholarly stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to show all 50 of them because I want to see them. It's a couple screens. I changed it. Usually only shows 10 at a time. It's by relevance. So it'd be the most, I see Nicaragua. I don't want outside the United States. So are there other filters I can use? Let's find out. There are a couple. This one doesn't do geography. A lot of them do. But say I want to do the subjects and I want it to local government and I want it to recreation and I want it in city towns and I want parks and I want recreation areas. And these are how many articles are left when I do this one topic. So I should drop from 39 to 20. Okay. So is there anything here that I'm looking at? It gives you an idea what the article's about. It tells me when it was published. So maybe I want something that's a little bit more current. Last 5 years. I'm down to 1. That's quick. Access for whom? White environmental recreation colonization and civic recreational. Boy, this is an interesting article. It's in Administrative Theory and Praxis, which is one of your major public administration journals. Um, One of the things it gives me is my subject headings and other subject headings that the author thought were needed. Gives me an abstract or what the article's about. Is this what I'm interested in? This deals basically with wilderness. I'm saying, yeah, I want this one. How do I get it? Well, I got access options. I can get it in PDF right now. I can read it online. If I don't have that option, it will give me the chance to look for it in the CSU library, which means if it's in one of our full text databases, but it's not full text here, it will link you to the article where else we may have it. And amazingly, you probably percentage wise, about 75% of the journals articles are here somehow in another database or whatever. So you want to make sure you don't limit to full text only because we may have it, but it's not here in this place. Ooh, look at this. Cited by 4. When this article came out, since it's been published, they did some other people cited it. In other words, I'm now finding more current information, taking whatever that article talked about, and it looks like it's kind of on its whiteness thing. So now I've got other articles. But look at this one. This is a brand new article that doesn't look like one, it's not indexed here, but it gives me a DOI. We're going to start to love those DOIs. I'm going to copy it. I am going to open another screen for the library. Let's see if that's what you're seeing. Okay. I'm going to go to advanced search. And one of the things it allows me to do, if I can see it on my screen, I got all sorts of, okay, go away, go away. I can do citation linker. And I can type in that DOI. It's a digital object identifier. All articles, scholarly book chapters, scholarly books now have been assigned a DOI. What it does is it goes, finds it, and it tells me, yes, we have it. It's publicly available. So that's where you're going to start to get, oh, it's because of Romania. You're going to start to get your open access stuff. Is it good, bad? You're going to have to determine yourself, but your PDF is there. Okay. Like I said, there's now a lot of discovery tools. You can track the author. You can track who cited the article. You can look at the bibliography within the article. You can expand your vocabulary and find more. You can use the author supplied subject headings. You can do, like I said, you discover a lot more than you used to. Lots and lots of choices. I'm going to break for a minute, stop sharing, and see if anybody has any questions about that one database and how to manipulate it. No? You're bored already. The only people who get excited about this is the librarians. We get excited about this stuff. You know, it's a search and find kind of thing. Okay. I want to show you another database. I want to show you, close that one out. I want to show you the ABI because I think you'll find this one very helpful. Okay. Accept all. Different vendor, so it looks different. Okay. This is the one that's the American Business Index that allows you to do trade and professionals, but it's also got these classification codes, and you can only do this on the first screen. I can look up classification codes, and I can limit my research. I'm hoping you're seeing these. I never know what pops up. Yes, you can. Nonprofit institution or public sector. You can pick both or one. I'm I'm going to do the public sector. I'm going to add it to my search. So it now does that for me. So I've kind of eliminated some of the business stuff at this point. So say I want to go back to my recreation and I don't want anywhere. Let's at least limit it to the subject things. And another word for city. I got 1,300. That's a lot more than my, 39. So now I'm going to pick my source type. Maybe I only want to make sure you're seeing what I'm showing. Yes. A trade publication. Maybe I want a report. So I want you or you. Let's take you, websites, you, and conference papers out. Still have over 700. But now I can start to do things like dates. I want current, update. I want maybe look at the subjects again. Definitely want the parks and recreation area, but maybe I want this time a location. So let's see. United States, Detroit, Grand Rapids. Boy, a lot in Michigan. Is there not anything in California? Los Angeles, there's one. Yes, if you do Long Beach, you have to do Los Angeles. Let's apply and let's see what the one is. A new stadium, of course. Nah, I don't want that, so I'm going to take it off. If you have X's by things, those are things you can take off and go back in time. So let's look at my reports disappeared. So let's do our 155 of. So again, you've got an abstract, what the article's about, where it's at, what they used. Let's go back and get my Parks and Recreation. Let's get 66. City Commission on base budget, Parks and Rec composing Big Apple. Department taking care of leaves. Here's the article. This database is old, so the reality is some of it is in HTML. Just go over to the PDF. That will show you the actual article. Okay. Remember, these are trades, so they won't have citations. They won't have some of the other good stuff that you get from the research articles. They're more the news about it. But people who looked at this article in this database also looked at some of these over here. They start to see a relationship because how they got there. They also help you. Maybe you want leaves in Parks and Recreation. Now you can do another search with different terms. If you want to download the PDF, you can. The other thing it allows you to do, and the other database does this too, is how to cite it. This one puts it in both, but you want the 7th edition. But look at it. I'm hoping you can see it. All our things allow you to cite things, but they include all the back firewall information, which you can't use. So we're going to talk about that, the citation, how to fix them. But go ahead and copy it. You've got at least the basic and you can fix it. But all our databases allow you to download the citation so you don't have to type it in. Best thing since sliced bread. Questions, comments, concerns. Let's see a question. Which database would you recommend more for us, the public administration abstracts database or the ABI Inform? That one's hard for me to answer because it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing something that's truly public administration, theory, um, research oriented, I would probably start with the public administration because it does the public administration journals. If you're doing something that's more in the field, like parks and recreation, budgeting, anything that might be a, I don't know, a business approach to public administration, then probably ABI Inform would be where I'd start. It does do scholarly articles too. I don't, there is an overlap of the journals covered both by public administration abstracts and the ABI Inform, but not a whole lot. So the reality is you might have to actually look at both. But where you're going, if you think theory and background, I would start the public administration. If you're thinking how to do it, the business end, I would do the ABI Inform. Does that help? To show you. Okay. And I get people in this program who are maybe doing nonprofit or they're doing church related things. I have other databases that I just don't put out there because they may be one student within 40 or 50. So don't be afraid if you're not finding what you want to ask a librarian, do the chat feature, and something else might be recommended that would probably be more appropriate for the particular topic or subtopic you're doing. It's one of those things. There's so much out there. I give you the stuff that'll help you at the beginning, but depending on where you're digging, it may change. That was a good question. Are there any others? Okay, we're still there. Have I showed you everything yet? No. Okay, that's our database. I showed you ABI Inform. Close it. Showed you the citation thing. I will mention this. Our OneSearch is a version of Google. The difference is it's more appropriate sources than what you would just find splattered out there on the internet. So if you want to start there, it's okay, but it truly doesn't have the refinements, the subject headings, the things that make it a little easier to use. Go ahead, Jana. What do you have? What's
Okay.
your question?
Um, my question is, since OneSearch is a Google entity, does it also do that AI recommendation thing where it like pulls all the AI recommended things to the top? Or and how do
Not
you like
yet.
protect
Not
against that?
yet.
Okay.
OneSearch does not yet. They're working on the software. We probably expect it within this year, 2026.
Okay. And since those AI powered articles are paid for by the publishers, how do we like differentiate when
Yeah.
yeah, like you were saying
Remember,
earlier.
yeah, remember it's like Google. So it has a lot of the open access stuff, which probably 90% of it's pretty bad. The one article I found, even though it's indexed, when I looked at it, it's probably something I wouldn't necessarily use because it's a foreign entity, unless I'm doing Romania. You'll get a lot of that kind of stuff. Um, I always recommend start. We spent a couple $1 million on these databases. Start with those. If you're struggling, then go back and use OneSearch and see if it does you find you something better. Then it might search across other. It might find an article that might be indexed in a other database that you're not using. Um, if you want to do the splatter search, go for it. But the time suck is horrible. That's all I got to say about it. As you saw with the databases, you can narrow it down pretty doggone fast to get, 5, 10 workable articles or reports or whatever. I don't find it that easy. I and I do search really well. So it's kind of like it. Does that make sense? A little bit?
Yeah, that makes sense. So one search is like a last resort type thing if you're really trying to look.
Or let's do this. You come across an article in a bibliography, copy the title of that article, put it in quotes, and move it to one search. It will get you to the article.
Got you. Okay.
Okay. It's more of an inventory, I call it, than a good search engine.
I got you. Thank you.
Okay. So that's how I found the DOI. It has a citation linker. I put the DOI in that little spot and it got me to that article. So if you think about it as an inventory control, it's a lot better in that area than it is as a search engine like the databases are. I hope that makes a little bit more sense.
That does. Thanks so much.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Because nothing's worse than someone says, I've been looking and I've been looking, I've been looking, I'm not finding anything. How long have you been looking? 2 hours. Like, why didn't you call us? You should find something within 30 minutes. Really, really, really. Okay. So that's why the chat becomes important. I'm looking, I'm not finding anything, I'm finding this, but it isn't what I want. So a librarian will help you maybe with your vocabulary, terminology, recommend other databases to look because the articles may more often be published somewhere else than where you're looking. Those are the kind of things that you pay us the big bucks for. Not that librarians make a lot of money, but yeah. Okay. Good questions. Good questions. Thank you. Librarians love questions. Um, Let me go back to the research guide, which I got to find now. Hold on. We'll have to, sorry, reload it up. That's another question. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Public librarians, I swear, they make the worst money. You need to bookmark this LibGuide. Just makes it easier. Okay. Um, so I talked about, I'll get sources. I talked about the publication of abstracts. I talked about the ABI Inform. I talked about the SAGE Handbook. The Encyclopedia of Political Science is like 40 volumes, so it's a lot bigger. It isn't as focused as this 2 volume set. International Encyclopedia of Social Science is even bigger, just so you know, but you never know what you might need for your topic. I want to show you a couple things here. Um, I put together this PPA topics. These are legitimate websites that have legitimate information. So I have gotten questions and I've had to do a little digging myself. So these are where things like budgeting, taxation, I need to get some information. I try to let you know what it does. So I've got that. I've got some things for cities and counties. It's interesting what's there and what's available. I've been looking for stuff for gender inclusiveness. We actually bought a brand new book, so it's a new on this course. These are actual book recommendations. Things for nonprofits. I've got some new recommendations here, as well as other things. The problem for finding information on nonprofits is 90% of it's behind firewalls. And we do not buy that stuff because it's so dang expensive. But talk to us, we can see what we can do for you. I've had questions about transportation. Here's some places. So if you have a question and we're struggling with it, I would probably set up an extra topics page just for those kind of things that would recommend. I know many of you take the policies class. So here's a whole guide just on policies. It's back to the databases I recommend. Congressional Digest is good for federal policies, national policies. Policy Agenda is a free website that has some good stuff on it. I link to policies that deal with these topics. And then librarians are very good about putting out policy directories. So we've got some of those out there and policy think tanks, which remember, look at the author, look at who wrote the report. Did they write anything? These are things that would help what you need to know about. Sure, I can put the PPA link in the chat. Give me a second here to go get it. I've got it somewhere. There. Now I gotta get back to you guys. Okay, let me do chat. There you go. That should get you the what you're going to bookmark and going to use. And I do update them. Like I said, we buy the software so I can update it as needed. I updated a lot of this yesterday. I checked all the links. I had to delete some things. They're no longer there. One of my favorite policy sites is gone. It's no longer available. They didn't renew their thing. It's not there. The shelf life of a site is 3 to 6 months anymore. A legitimate site will update their stuff and change their links if they're really good constantly. So sometimes I link to the overall and tell you maybe where to go look in the little descriptions. The shelf life on the internet is very short, just so you know. Okay. That's this one. I also have a link for if you're doing the research design class. We have a database that talks about research methods. This is where you'll find the data sets that we have. This guide actually links to actually data sets, and it actually has the front page talks about the ones that the federal government has taken down, that you can't get that information anymore. It has close to 2,000 links on it, and I got to tell you, it's hard to maintain. Polling data, Policy Map is a great database. It allows you to map out and ask things so you can see a neighborhood and you can map it. What transportation, bus system do they have? Where's their closest health? Where's their closest education? It allows you to actually look at data through what they call GIS, Global Information System. So you can actually put data sets on top of it and kind of see where the stuff is. Then I've got some federal stuff. Um, there's some instrument guidelines we have, and then we have books that help you find stuff on research if you have to take. Um, if you're doing program evaluation class, the better databases. Actually, this is where Google works really well. And here's the trick. These are the phrases you want to put in there. I do one at a time and your topic. You can do the one search. Again, you want to use some of these phrases against your topic to limit it to what you need. Does this make sense? Questions? Okay. Let me reshare my screen to my PowerPoint. Oops. Are you guys seeing that? Yes. My problem is I'm not. Where is it? There it is. Okay. I can't move it. Why won't it go? Oh, because I'm not on the PowerPoint. That's why. Okay. It's not, oh, I got to stop sharing. It's not picking it up. Okay, let me try again. This is better than Teams, though. Teams doesn't allow you to share anything, I swear. Okay, this is back to the original PowerPoint. So I was talking about the research guide that I just demonstrated to you. So I showed you the get sources. Now we're going to talk the basics of APA 7th edition. I showed you that all the databases, one search including, allows you to do a site. I have the little extras there at the front of the research guide. There is bibliography managing software that is you can download. EndNote we have, Mendeley we have, and Zotero we have. You attach it to your web browser. I think Mendeley and Zotero work with Firefox. They may work with Microsoft. I don't know. Microsoft is they're kind of territorial about what you can attach to their search browsers. But it allows you then to download it. It'll help you maintain your citations. And let me mention this right now. When you're in the databases, if you see some articles and you think, oh, I don't think I need that, I highly recommend you click on it and at least email the citation to yourself. The hardest question to answer is someone who says, well, I saw this article about so and so, and it was, I think, in this database. Finding that article again is so hard because you saw how many databases we have and how many places it could be, and it is so hard. So one of the things you might want to create is like with your managing software is a kind of a reading list. So you have those citations, so you might need them later, and you can go back and then find it and actually get the source. It is one of the hardest things to do is to go back. And I'm a good example of I'm doing research and I think I got 45 right now, things that I saw and I can't find out where I saw them. And Interlibrary Loan asked me where I saw them because it isn't a right citation. I don't know. It's hard. Okay. So basically for an article, things that you need are the author and first initial, middle initial if they have it. Um, if there's more than one author, it's and. APA now allows you up to 40 authors. They've gotten very forgiving because in the health sciences, quite often all the research assistants are included in the authors. So they're all included, the year in parentheses, the title of the article. Note that the first word is capitalized and the rest are all lowercase. This is going to become very important when you edit your citations you download. Period. The name of the periodical, italicized in all upper lowercase, comma, the volume, which is also italicized, but the issue number in parentheses is not, comma, first page dash last page. Let me tell you right now, ABI Inform, because of its age, will give you the first page and tell you the article's 16 pages. It will not tell you the last page. You may have to do the math. Or if you can find the PDF, find the last page so you can include both. If the article jumps, say it starts on page 11 through 15, and then jumps to 26, then you put a comma 26. 11-15, comma 26. You put all the pages in there. Then if the article is research oriented, scholarly, you got to include the DOI and you put it in this way, https://doi.org/ and the alphanumeric thing they gave you. APA created it. Okay, go ahead, Jason. Ask your question.
Yeah, so basically you're saying if we want to cite with the page and it's jump, so it's like 11 to 13, and then there's another one, it's like 26 to 29. We just put a comma, 26 to 29, comma, 35 to 38.
Correct.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep. You lump them together, but if there's a space, you comma and put the space. Yep. Think of the comma as the space between pages. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. DOI came out with the 7th edition. APA created the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier. In doing so, the scholarly publishers went back and put DOIs on all their historical journal articles back to 1912, if that's where the journal was published, started. So sometimes when you're looking at something older, you don't see a DOI, but you know it's a scholarly article. That's when you might go over to OneSearch and look the article up again and see if they have included the DOI based on the publisher providing them the information. The databases may not be able to get that information in hindsight. So this started about 2015, I think. It's 10 years old now. Yeah. And it took them a while to get this all done. And then they created then that search engine that with that HTTPS, somebody can put that in and now find that article. That became part of the evolution of this. So it becomes very important to make sure you have your DOIs. Remember, trade publications, professional journals do not have DOIs because they're not scholarly research oriented. APA doesn't, whatever. APA doesn't count them. That's beside the point. If you have a book or a report, again, your authors, your copyright year, if you can find it, the title of the book, capitalization, say it's a chapter in a book, Like you do the Sage Encyclopedia of Public Administration, and you want to cite that you saw it because you read it, and you should cite it if you're using it for your research because you read it and it's part of your research. You need to cite what you see, people, so you don't get caught with plagiarism. It's a dirty thing, horrible thing. So you do the title of the chapter, then you say it's in the editors, then the title of the book, which is again capitalization lower. Then if it's a psych edition, again, this is where you put PPs. I'm glad APA stopped all the PPs and all everything else except the books and book chapters. Again, the publisher, you no longer have to put city and state. Publishers have been moving around for a long time, and it got to be really a problem. So you only have to put the publisher's name, and that's all you need. Then, if it has a DOI, say it's a chapter in a scholarly academic press, then they would have a DOI. Or if it's something like a report you found online, then you use the ULR that you found. If it's an organization, it's the organization name, the year, the title of the report, the agency in charge of the report, or whoever published it, and then the link. So, go. So, this is what your DOI should look like. But as you saw, this is what it downloaded my DOI to look like. So, I had to drop all the retrieve from. I had to take off the DOI colon here and then start with the HTTP and then add this and then put in the rest of it. Because when you do that in the databases, that's what you get. They haven't, I don't know why they can't do it correct. I don't know what the problem is. They're AIing, and AI still doesn't understand DOIs at all. So, okay. Having said that, these are examples of citation I actually downloaded, and this is what I got. And you're going to help me figure out if it's correct or not. So, from Public Administration Abstracts, I've got this citation from NOAA. No, no. Federal Strategies. I've got my journal, my volume, my issue, my pages, my DOI. What do I have to correct? You can drop it in chat if you desire to do that.
Is it all the capitalization?
You got it. That's the other problem. Capitalization seems to be a problem. Um, so the only words that need to be capitalized is federal, lowercase strategics, lowercase induce, resistance, states to participate. Now the ACA Health Exchange is an official name. It can stay in capitalization because it's an official noun, official name. But that is correct. What about from ABI Inform? What is wrong? I've got, besides the little question marks, which should be quotation marks. um, I
The
got my author,
DOI is
the
wrong.
DOI. Okay, now remember, this is an Employee Benefits Advisor online. It is not a peer-reviewed scholarly article. So officially, it doesn't have a DOI. This is the search strategy that got you to it. I would put a period after online and leave it. If they want it, they can go to things like OneSearch and type in employee and benefits advisor and find out where it's published and go look for it. Or put the quote, NFL won't promote Obamacare after all, end quote, and find it. This is kind of ABI does a lot of what I call newsletter kind of things. And this is the kind of thing you see. The only things that'll have DOIs are scholarly peer reviewed stuff. And ABI does some of it, but most of it is not that. I hope that makes sense. From politics database, we didn't even look at it, but this is what it gave us. The authors, the year, all we do now, the title. It's not a scholar peer-reviewed journal. It's a magazine. Actually it's a trade publication, professional journal from the American Planning Association. Volume, issue, pages. What's wrong? Anybody? What was wrong with the first one?
Capitalization.
Capitalization.
Yeah, this one's really got a problem with capitalization. So the only thing that should be capitalized is the word all. Everything else should be in lowercase. Does this make a bit of sense? When you save your citations, you are going to have to edit them. Okay? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Good. Well, I've come to the end, but I want to give you a chance to see if you can really do what I talked about. So we'll take about 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to put in the chat a Google Doc. Stop sharing. And I need to be here. Okay. So there are I think there's 4 research topics that I want you to work through as a group. I'm going to put you in I call them escape rooms. I'm going to put you in Zoom rooms. So if your name starts with a B or C, your first name, you'll probably start with the first one. D's, E's, F's. I'll do the second one, and I need to remember what they are. I have them here somewhere. Hold on. I think the first one is maybe budget. The second one might be water. If your name starts with looks like a bunch of J's, you guys will do the third one, K's, and I think K's are it. K's and R will do the last one. Does that make sense? Let me open and share and see if we're all on the same place. Oh, where did it go? You guys disappeared on me. So this is what I'm having you get into. So my A's and B's are doing water. My C's and D's are budget. My J's and K's are parks. And the R's and what was it? R's and S's and K's will do waste.
Are we going by first names?
Yep, do your first name. That's
Okay.
it's easier for me to see the first names.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to open it up, and this is a chance where we start talking. Once you click on something, it will take you through and ask you things. Okay. So let me go and set break rooms. Well, it guys set you up it automatically sets you up in rooms. Well, you're gonna get the room 1, 2, 3, 4. So do 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, it didn't it didn't break you by name. It broke you by, I don't know. Yeah, I can see. So is your group done?
Yep.
People are coming back. Yay! Welcome back. Um, a couple of things, because when I ask you questions, then I can figure out if you understood what I did. And this is your chance to ask me more questions because maybe things didn't quite go. It looked easy when I talked about it, and now it's not because you got to do it, that kind of thing. So if you have any questions, now's your chance.
We had a question on the articles we were doing, the Parks and Recreation. So when it came down to it, it wasn't an article or anything. So when we had the link or the website where we got it from, since it wasn't a DOI, we deleted the whole thing. That's fine, right? Because
Yep. Um, did
this is what is it fine if I put what I wrote on there? I can send you
yeah,
the chat. This is what we
yeah,
had. I don't know if it comes up on the chat.
it does. And that would be correct. That's what you have to do. Remember planning? You don't know this, but it's by the American Planning Association. That's all you've got.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good. Thank you.
I will
Perfect.
note that you did David as his full name. It should be a first initial, but that's the minor point. I did pull some of them because several of you did this. I want to make sure you understand the DOI when you get one. Okay, the first part's okay, although the capitalization, you need to work on that. Um, but you don't put the DOI org, CSUL, BIBM, CLOC. That's all our coding for security walls. All you want is to stop at or G, put a slash, and then do the rest of it. I noticed several of you left what I call the firewalls in there. Let's see if I can see anybody else who might have had one. Um, oh, here's even a better one. Yep, Jason, you've got your little like this one. Yeah, I think I'm doing the same one. You got the vendor in there. Doesn't help. So that particular one, public administration review, I guess the question it's 1992, right there is an indicator to me that it may have a DOI, but remember it's pre 2015. So this is where do this here and show you what I'm talking about. Share. I hope I've got something I can use to share. That's what I want. This is where I'm going to go to OneSearch. I'm going to put a quote around the title of that article and search it. And I have to go back and see what it actually do the got too many screens I can't see. Was this the budget reform conclude? No, no, that wasn't the title. But yes, it was 1992. That was the title, correct? Number three. Yeah, there's two of them. Okay.
Yeah,
So
it
I'm
was
gonna
three.
okay. So I'm looking at that article now, and I'm looking in this reference. It still doesn't give me the DOI there.
I think I saw it on there.
You did see it?
Yeah, I think it said DOI on it. Right
Oh,
there
right
under
here.
the yeah.
Yep, there it is. So this is where OneSearch inventory, it's collected all the stuff that's been since 1992 and now gives us the DOI. So I would type in https:// doi.org / 10.2307/976805. That's it. Doesn't need a period or anything. You've done it. Does that make sense? Because of,
Yes.
okay, because the problem is the age of some of the materials. The vendors just didn't, and this is from public administration abstracts, which is probably the, that actually index was in paper literally until 2020, maybe 2019. I mean, yeah. So it's not a major, ProQuest bought the rights to it, so it isn't a major public index tool. Okay.
I just want to say, so that required the DOI because it was a peer-reviewed article, right?
Correct.
Sounds great.
Yep. Trade professionals, no DOIs. Peer-reviewed scholarly DOIs. So when you limit to peer-reviewed, when you do your search with all these vendors, they should all have DOIs. If you do trade professionals and say ABI, limit to those, they will not have DOIs. I think you got it. Any last questions? Because I am done entertaining you for the evening.
Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you so much, Kelly. I truly appreciate you being here and being so generous with your time for us again. As I told you at the outset, probably the most useful presentation you'll have throughout the entire MPA program, because since we don't do research in this class because we're introductory course, you will be doing this type of research in your future courses. And Kelly's just done an amazing job of preparing you for that. So thank you again, Kelly. Truly appreciate you being
Okay.
here. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Because you won't call on me to help you because you're slick, your librarian potential here. Have a good evening, all. Enjoy the rest of your class.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thank
Kelly.
you.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Okay, everyone. Let's go ahead and take a little bit of a break. Let's say we'll take a break until 6 o'clock. Come on back at 6 o'clock, and then we will do our introduction to American government and the importance of American government for public administration. So come on back at 6 o'clock, and we will do an abbreviated version of our introduction to American government. Okay, welcome back, and let's go ahead and get into our discussion of American government. Whatever we don't cover tonight, we'll just extend that discussion into the beginning of class next week, because I don't think we'll have in 45 minutes enough time to get through all this information. But before we start with the discussion of American government, just a real quick reminder, I did notice that D1DA, the Day One Digital Access deadline, has been changed to February the 2nd. I know last week in our Canvas site, it said February the 3rd. I noticed that they went ahead and just changed it without telling anyone. So actually, the deadline to opt out of D1DA will be no later than 11:59 p.m. next Monday on February the 2nd. But there's a reminder that should pop up whenever you log into your Canvas site. But just want to make sure we're all clear. It's February 2nd and not February the 3rd. As I also told you last week, in this 500 course, we decided a few years ago to add this module on American government just to make sure that everyone's on the same page with the institutions of American government, because what we do in public administration is done within public organizations. And those public organizations are obviously located within institutions of American government. And since so many people come into the program from a variety of different academic backgrounds, it's good for us to kind of have this primer and this refresher on American government. So we know that our system of American government is predicated on this idea of the limitation of government power. This was something that was very important to the framers of the Constitution. And as you probably remember, they did it in two different ways. One way in which they limited government power was horizontally through the separation of powers. And so the creation of a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. So that's your first separation of powers being done horizontally across the national level of government. When we look at the Constitution, which we'll probably do next week, the first three articles of the Constitution speak directly to these three branches of government. Congress is talked about in Article 1, the presidency is talked about in Article 2, and the judiciary is talked about, Supreme Court is talked about in Article 3. Congress is the first topic of the first article. Article 1 of the Constitution is by far the lengthiest and most detailed article in the entire Constitution, which has led a lot of political scientists to make the argument that Congress is therefore the quote unquote first branch of government. The balance of power between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary really is a very dynamic and fluid situation. At certain points in our history, we have seen Congress dominate presidencies. We have seen some very powerful speakers of the House that have been effective at dominating the presidents of their time. So people like Henry Clay and Joe Cannon and Thomas Brackett Reed. And some would say modern speakers, such as some would argue Newt Gingrich, some will argue Jim Wright, Tip O'Neill. So you've had some instances where Congress has dominated the president, but we are currently living through a time where it appears the president is dominating Congress. There is a theory of the current administration known as unitary executive theory. And unitary executive theory says that the president, as the only nationally elected official, should essentially be the repository of power and should essentially be the first branch of government and should dominate the other two branches. Unitary executive theory is nothing new. It's something that dates back to the Andrew Jackson administration way back in the 1820s and early 1830s, but it does really consolidate power in the office of the president. We have seen the Congress today and the majority in the Congress cede a lot of their powers to the president. One good example of that is the appropriations power. So the Constitution tells us that we have an appropriations clause in the Constitution that says before Congress can remove money from the federal treasury, Congress must first appropriate those funds. Appropriation is just simply the process of saying how that money will be spent, what that money will be spent on. So funds must be appropriated by Congress. That traditionally has given Congress what we call the power of the purse strings. And it's a very powerful resource that Congress has. The current administration has made decisions not to spend those appropriated funds that have been appropriated by law by Congress. When the president decides not to spend money that's been appropriated by Congress, that is what's known as a rescission. The current president has done it on a couple of occasions where he has rescinded those funds and refused to spend them. Under a law from the 1970s, the Congressional Budget Impoundment Control Act, the way in which rescission is supposed to work is the president, whenever they rescind funds, they then send a list of those rescissions to Congress. Congress then reviews those rescissions and decides whether or not to approve those rescissions. The first time the president did this rescission here in this first year of his second term, he sent a rescissions package over to Congress, and Congress approved that rescissions package. The second time the president did it, he did not send a rescissions package over to Congress and just said, I am not spending this money, and Congress decided not to assert its authority. So right now we're living through an era where it's the executive branch that tends to dominate Congress. At other points in our history, we have had a Supreme Court that has dominated both Congress as well as presidents. Way back in 1803, we had this very important Supreme Court case, Marbury versus Madison, in which Chief Justice Marshall established the principle of judicial review. Judicial review gave the Supreme Court the ability to review the actions of both Congress as well as members of the executive branch. That type of judicial review greatly expanded the power of the Supreme Court. Now, we have seen that power kind of ebb and flow over the years. We've seen courts such as the Warren and the Burger Court that have been very active in terms of expanding judicial power We saw an expansion of judicial power in the Rehnquist court. And now we see the Roberts court spending most of their time dealing with the issue of the balance of power between Congress and the president, most times siding with the president in recent Supreme Court cases. So it's a very fluid and dynamic balance horizontally between these three different branches of government, but all intended to limit the power of government. Then we have our vertical limitation of power, which is through our system of American federalism. Federalism, according to our Constitution, establishes two levels of government, national and state governments. Local governments do not enjoy any protection under the original Constitution. Local governments are not mentioned in the original Constitution. We only have those two different levels of national and state. So usually when we're talking about the term American federalism, we're usually talking about the relationship between national and state governments. Once we start to add local governments into the equation, we transition from a discussion of federalism into what we now know as intergovernmental relations. And this is the reason why the course we offer as an elective in our program is called Intergovernmental Relations rather than Federalism, because we spend a lot of time looking at the relationship between all three levels of government. So we have a horizontal as well as a vertical separation of powers to limit the power of government. Our government, we oftentimes like to refer to as a democracy. The fact of the matter is, we have democratic elements in our form of government, but our form of government is probably better approximated as a constitutional republic. So the difference you're probably aware of between a democracy and a republic. In a democracy, people make the decisions. And so people participate directly in making decisions over issues and policies and laws. That would be a pure direct democracy. We are more of a republic in that we elect our elected officials to go to Washington, Sacramento, Long Beach, wherever, to make decisions on our behalf. So we are really much more of a constitutional republic. You've probably heard the very famous quote from Benjamin Franklin, because media outlets love to use this quote, that when Franklin was leaving the Constitutional Convention, someone asked him, "What type of a government did you create?" And he said, "We have a republic as long as we can keep it." So with the republic, we elect people to make decisions for us as opposed to a direct democracy. Now, that being said, we are a constitutional republic, but there are elements of direct democracy in a lot of states. And so the amount of democracy you are afforded really depends upon the state in which you live. So we live here in California. California has a lot of vestiges of a direct democracy. And two main examples of that would be an initiative and a referendum process. So here in California, through the initiative process, members of the public can circulate a petition. And if you get enough valid signatures on that petition, then you can force an issue onto the ballot and have the voters vote directly on that issue. That's what's known as the initiative process. Here in California, for an initiative, you have to get a number of valid signatures on your petition equal to at least 8% of the number of voters who voted in the last gubernatorial election. Now, that 8% standard is here in California. Other states have different standards. Some states have 10 and 12 and 15%. We have an 8% standard for the number of signatures you need on your petition to get your issue on the ballot. When you circulate those petitions, you get those signatures, they need to be valid signatures, meaning that they are signatures of registered voters who have an address that can be verified. That petition goes to the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State then reviews that petition, will do a random sample of signatures on that petition to make sure that that random sample of signatures is actually valid. Once they find out there are enough valid signatures on the petition, they will then put that issue onto the ballot. So that's an initiative, direct democracy. Then we also have the referendum process. In the referendum process, we allow voters to vote directly on some type of issue that's been passed by the legislature. And that's the most common type of referendum. So the state legislature will pass a law or will propose a constitutional amendment. Then through the referendum process, it will then go on the ballot and the voters will have the opportunity to vote on that issue or that law. And here in California, there have been instances where the voters, through a referendum process, have actually voted against a law that was passed by the state legislature and have overridden a law passed by the state legislature. If you're using a petition and circulating a petition to get a referendum on the ballot, the number of signatures required is a lower standard than for an initiative. Instead of 8%, it's only 5% to get a referendum on the ballot here in California. But whether you're using initiatives or referenda, you are doing direct democracy types of practices that are allowed under state law and state constitution here in California, but are not allowed in some other states. So there are other states that have an initiative, but not a referendum process. Some have a referendum process, but not an initiative process. And still other states have neither an initiative or a referendum process like we see here in California. So again, our type of government is a constitutional republic with some direct democracy sprinkled in, but the amount of democracy you are afforded will depend upon the state in which you live. So we are a constitutional republic because our republican form of government is spelled out in the Constitution. The Constitution is the contract between the people and their elected officials and their government. This is what's known as social contract theory. And if you took any undergraduate political science courses, you probably talked about people like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a lot of those very famous political philosophers in the 1600s and 1700s that were very much admired by the framers of the Constitution at the Constitutional Convention. John Locke was one of those political philosophers that was very much admired by a lot of your delegates at the convention. He was very much admired by James Madison, very much admired by Thomas Jefferson. So admired by Thomas Jefferson that Thomas Jefferson actually borrowed directly from John Locke's second treatise on government, where John Locke said they may not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That then got changed by Jefferson into life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So property was changed in the pursuit of happiness, but very much of an overlap in the thought process between the founders and what we had with John Locke. So John Locke, in his second treatise on government, postulates this idea of a social contract theory, whereby people enter into a contract with their government. That contract is essentially the Constitution. Now, whenever you enter into a contract, you have two parties who are part of a contract. You expect that both parties will uphold their end of the bargain. So in this social contract, people give up certain powers to government, and then they expect government to utilize those powers in a judicious manner to provide for the welfare of society. So you have expectations in this social contract on the behavior of the government. Now, what happens when government violates the social contract? This is something that Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote a lot about in his writings in the 1700s. Rousseau made the argument, and Jefferson agreed with this argument, that if government violates the social contract, if it breaks the Constitution, then it's not only the right, but the obligation of the people to remove that government and replace it with a government that would abide by the social contract. With all pun intended, obviously that's a very revolutionary type of idea, and Rousseau's idea really gave the underpinnings and the impetus behind the French Revolution. So if government's not upholding their end of the contract, people will overturn that government and replace it with a government that will uphold its end of the bargain. So our constitutional republic is set up on this idea of Locke's social contract theory. The contract, as we said, is the Constitution. In our American government history, we have had two constitutions, the Articles of Confederation and then the current constitution under which we now live. The Articles of Confederation, our first constitution. And I gave you a link to go and take a cursory look at the Articles of Confederation. The Articles had a lot of problems in the way in which they were devised. One of the main problems is that the Articles talked about this new United States as being a firm league of friendship. So there's a firm league of friendship between sovereign states. So the states all retain their own sovereignty. Also, when you read the articles, you will see that the term United States of America, capitalized as a proper noun, occurs one time in the Articles of Confederation. And that one time is where the articles say the style of this confederacy shall be the United States of America. By using the word style, they basically meant the title. They're saying we're going to call ourselves, this confederacy, we're going to call it the United States of America, proper noun. Throughout the rest of the articles, whenever you see the term United States used, it is typically used as United States in Congress assembled, meaning that we are the United States when the states get together into this meeting known as a Congress. So today we think about Congress, we think about that image on the first slide of Capitol Hill. It's a permanent brick and mortar institution. For the framers in the Articles of Confederation, it was not a permanent institution. They were using the term Congress in the same manner as we would use the term meeting today. A Congress is a meeting. So tonight we are having a Congress of PPA 500. So we are only unified as the United States when the states were together in this meeting. Question then becomes, when they were not together in this meeting, how united were we as a country? It was very much a confederation where each individual state retained their sovereignty. In the Articles of Confederation, whenever the state delegates would go to this Congress, go to this meeting, states could recall their delegates at any time. So if Virginia didn't like what was going on in this Congress, they could just tell their delegates to pick up their marbles and go back home. Whenever you have sovereign states that can recall their delegates at any time, it's going to be very difficult for this Congress to really get anything done. Under the Articles, we essentially had a unicameral type of government in that we had this Congress, this meeting of the states. We didn't have an independent presidency. The president came out of this meeting of Congress, had very few of the powers that we think about when we think about the office of presidency today. We didn't really have a judicial system. It was really very much this loose confederation of these different sovereign states. Another problem associated with the Articles of Confederation is because you have this loose confederation, it was very difficult for this meeting of the states to have a uniform currency. Any type of uniform laws and regulations were very difficult. And if you found a flaw in the Articles that needed to be rectified, the only way to amend the Articles of Confederation would be through a unanimous vote of all 13 sovereign states. You can imagine how difficult it would be to get unanimity on the part of these 13 states to change the Articles. So even though the Articles had these flaws, we couldn't change them because we couldn't get a unanimous vote of all 13 states. One of the most glaring problems in the Articles of Confederation is that there was truly no standing army, that our defense was to be provided for by individual state militias. Now, as you will see as you take your 670 policy course, one of the primary reasons why we make major changes to public policies in this country is because of the occurrence of what's called a triggering event. So something happens that galvanizes public opinion around the idea that we need to change the way in which we are addressing this issue or this policy. The major triggering event that occurred, history books will refer to as Shays' Rebellion. Now, even though they call it Shays' Rebellion, there were multiple rebellions in the 1780s, especially in 1786 and 1787. Shays' Rebellion was the most notable rebellion because it was a rebellion that was led by a retired Army captain by the name of Daniel Shays. So at that time, we had a lot of small farmers who were losing their farms. They were being foreclosed on by these banks. So we had a lot of these rebellions where the farmers would then march on the banks to try and get the banks to stop foreclosing on their farms. To get arms, they would march on armories in order to get the arms they need for their rebellion. In Massachusetts, we had Shays Rebellion led by Captain Daniel Shays, which was one of these rebellions against the banks to try and stop farm foreclosures. The problem was it took a while for Massachusetts to put down this rebellion of a bunch of farmers led by a retired Army captain, which then raised the red flag of if we have trouble putting down a rebellion of farmers, what are we going to do in the face of foreign invasion? So it really galvanized public opinion around the idea that we need to amend the articles to create a stronger national defense. And that is what then led to the Constitutional Convention. The purpose of the Constitutional Convention was merely to amend the Articles of Confederation, not to do away with them and completely replace them with a new constitution. However, what happened at the Constitutional Convention is not all of the delegates got there at the same time. We had some delegates that got there before others. Roads were very difficult to cover. They're very difficult to make your way from your home to the Constitutional Convention. And so the delegates who got to the convention first were essentially in this group known as the Federalists. The delegates who wanted to see a new constitution with a much stronger, more vibrant national government. Those who opposed that idea were the Anti-Federalists, and the Anti-Federalists got there much later than the Federalists. By the time the Anti-Federalists got there, Madison and the other Federalists were able to get the ball rolling downhill toward abolishing the Articles and replacing them with a brand new Constitution. Also, Madison at the convention was very astute with the way in which he argued for this new, stronger national government. He knew that the Anti-Federalists would be in favor of amending the Articles to create a stronger national defense. But he also knew that the delegates at the Constitutional Convention were all white male property owners. To be a delegate, you had to be white, you had to be male, you had to be a property owner. White male property owners in the 1780s were the creditors in society. These were the landowners who had loaned money to make the revolution possible. Since they had loaned money to try and make the revolution possible, they wanted to get their debts repaid. So there's very much an economic imperative for these delegates at the convention. What Madison was able to do is to tap into that economic imperative and show these anti-federalists that by creating this new, stronger national government, not only will you get national defense, but you'll also get your debts repaid by having a national government that could regulate commerce and could establish currencies that will help you get your money back. This whole idea of an economic imperative on the part of the delegates at the convention was something that was talked about a lot by a historian by the name of Charles Beard. And Charles Beard in the early 1900s wrote a thesis known as an economic interpretation of the Constitution. And that's the argument that he made, is that they were there with this economic imperative. And because of that economic imperative, Madison was able to convince the Anti-Federalists to create a stronger national government. Once Madison got the Anti-Federalists to admit that they wanted more out of this new government than just national defense, then it was essentially game over. And it became very difficult for the Anti-Federalists to stop the abolishment of the Articles and the replacement of the Articles with this new Constitution. At the Constitutional Convention, as the framers were kind of sketching out this new Constitution to replace the Articles, and as the father of the Constitution, James Madison's the one who is credited most with writing the Constitution, we had three main conflicts that were really tearing apart the Constitutional Convention. Because of these three main conflicts, we see the Constitution becoming a series of compromises. The one set of compromises we get in the Constitution is the compromise between large states and small states over representation in Congress. So what we ended up getting is we had a Virginia plan. The Virginia plan was the solution among the large states, which called for one body of Congress, one House of Congress, that would be based upon proportional representation. Obviously, if you have a big population in your state, proportional representation would give you more representation in Congress. Small states had their counter plan, which was the New Jersey plan, which called for equal representation. As we all know from our civics education, the Great Compromise was the Connecticut Compromise that created a bicameral legislature, a House of Representatives based on proportional representation, and then a Senate based upon equal representation. And we see that in Article 1 of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 1 sets up this bicameral Congress. Article 1, Section 2 lays out the responsibilities and the duties and functions of the House. Article 1, Section 3 lays out the duties and responsibilities of the Senate. So that's the first main compromise. And I think we make an argument that the framers did a pretty good job with that first compromise. And the Congress that they create, this bicameral Congress, still exists today. The second conflict is the one that they obviously did not handle well. And that was this conflict between slave and free states. Slave states obviously wanted a continuation of the institution of slavery and not only wanted it to continue, but wanted to see it expand into the territories so that when new states were admitted to the Union, they were hoping they'd be admitted as slave states, which would then give slave states more representation in Congress. Also, representatives from slave states were hoping to get the institution of slavery built into the Constitution. And they pushed very hard to get the institution of slavery in the Constitution itself. That's an important point because if you put something in a Constitution, you are essentially freezing it. You are cementing it within the Constitution. The only way to change it would be with constitutional amendments. We all know how hard it is to amend the Constitution. Constitution has been amended 27 times. 10 of those times all came at once in the Bill of Rights. So Madison, even though he was a slave owner, he argued against the inclusion of institutional slavery in the Constitution, along with Alexander Hamilton, kind of strange bedfellows, but they were successful at keeping the institutional slavery out of the Constitution. Where they were not successful were in the other two main compromises they came up with, the Three-Fifths Compromise, which we see in Article 1 of the Constitution, and the prohibition against banning the slave trade until at least the year 1808. Those are two compromises that obviously are impossible to defend. They did a very poor job dealing with the slavery issue. And essentially, what they did is they kicked the issue ahead to future generations and really laid the seeds for what would eventually result in the Civil War. So, whereas they did a good job with the first issue, they did an abhorrent job, what I think we can make a compelling argument for, with the second issue. Then the third issue, the third conflict, was what we've already mentioned, this conflict between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists want to see a much stronger national government that can provide not only national defense, but also economic regulation. The Anti-Federalists wanted to maintain state sovereignty. They feared a new, stronger national government. So even after this series of compromises we see in the Constitution, it was difficult to get the Anti-Federalists to sign off on ratifying the new Constitution. And once the Constitution was passed out of the Constitutional Convention, very quickly, within about a year, we had the requisite number of states ratifying it for the Constitution to go into effect. According to the seventh article in the Constitution, in order for the Constitution to go into effect, you had to have ratification by 9 out of 13 states. Got that relatively quickly. The problem was one of the major states that had not yet ratified the Constitution was New York. New York was the linchpin of all commerce in the colonies in the 1780s. Whenever goods flowed into the colonies, they flowed in through the port of New York and were then, moved on to other states. But you had all these goods coming in through the port of New York. If you didn't have New York on board, you really did not have a functioning nation. So, what the framers had to do is to convince the Anti-Federalists in New York to ratify this new constitution. As we know, they did that in two ways. One way they did it was through the writing of these Federalist Papers. So Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay wrote 85 Federalist Papers. They were a sales pitch to try and convince Anti-Federalists, especially in New York, to ratify the new Constitution. We saw John Jay write only 5 papers because he fell ill and that's all he was able to write. James Madison wrote 29 of the papers, and Alexander Hamilton wrote the remaining 51. So by far, the most words were written by Alexander Hamilton. However, all these papers were written to convince New Yorkers to ratify the Constitution. For this class, we pull out 2 of those Federalist Papers to focus on. The 2 we pull out to focus on are Federalist number 10 and Federalist number 39. Now, Federalist Paper number 10 is what you will use as the basis for Canvas essay number 1, which is due next week. So it's due next Tuesday by midnight. Federalist number 10 is written by Madison. And in Federalist 10, Madison makes the argument essentially for supporting what he calls this compound republic. So the prevailing thought process at the time, in the late 1700s, was the most effective and efficient way to run a government was through what's called a compact republic, whereby you had a small jurisdiction comprised of a lot of like-minded people who shared the same or similar opinions. And by governing this small jurisdiction made up of people with similar opinions, that's the effective way for a society to govern itself, a compact republic. That was something that was put forth by Montesquieu and other philosophers. So that was prevailing thought at the time. Madison had a countervailing opinion where he said, no, the most effective way to run a government is through a compound republic. In a compound republic, we have a large jurisdiction that's comprised of a lot of different groups that have different opinions and different ideas. The way in which we run that compound republic is not by eliminating differences in opinion, because that would eliminate democracy, but instead balancing group against group, balancing opinion against opinion, or as Hamilton calls it in a different Federalist paper, balancing ambition against ambition. So according to Madison, the most effective way to structure a compound republic is through the controlling of these different groups, what he called the controlling of these factions. So Federalist 10 is important for us because it tells us a compound republic is realistic and it can actually work and be effective if we can control the effects of all these different factions, all these different groups, and all these different opinions. By far, my favorite Federalist paper is Federalist number 39, because I think Federalist number 39 is a great microcosm of the defense of this new Constitution. And Madison also wrote Federalist 39. And when he wrote Federalist 39, he was defending the Constitution and telling the Anti-Federalists they should ratify it because, number one, it was something familiar to them. So he basically takes this new constitution and he compares it to existing state constitutions. And he makes the argument that this new constitution is nothing to be afraid of. It really looks and feels a lot like the constitutions you've already have in your respective states. So for instance, we have a president. Now, that president is similar to the governor that you currently have in your state. That president will serve a 4-year term. That 4-year term served by a president is actually shorter than some of the terms that governors serve in your state. So don't be afraid of having a monarchy or having some type of a dictator. That person's only there for 4 years as compared to governors who are actually there a lot longer. Says, well, look at the House of Representatives. In the House of Representatives, we have members who serve 2-year terms. Well, a lot of your state assemblies, a lot of your state legislatures actually have terms that are a lot longer than 2 years. Yes, granted, U.S. senators will serve long 6-year terms, but in some of your states, those terms of your members of the legislature are actually 7 and 8 years. So he says, don't be afraid of this. This Constitution, this new national government, is not unlike what you are already familiar with in your states. Then the second way he defends the Constitution is he goes through and deconstructs the Constitution into its component elements to again show that this new national government is nothing to be afraid of, and this new national government will not tread upon the rights of these sovereign states. So and we won't go through it all, but he asks questions such as, well, let's look at what's the basis of power. Where did this new Constitution, where did this new national government come from? And his basic question he's asking is the new Constitution national or is it federal? If it is national, then it means the power resides within the national government. If it is federal, then the power resides with the states. So is it national or is it federal? Well, this new Constitution, this new union was created by the states. The states ratified the Constitution. So the states created this union, so therefore the basis of the power resides with the states. For Madison, that was a useful argument in Federalist 39. However, over the years, it actually served as the basis for Southern states to secede from the Union. Because Southern states would point back at Federalist 39 and say, look, Madison said that we as states created the Union. So if we created the Union, we should legally be able to leave the Union. And that's the basis they use for seceding from the United States in the lead up to the Civil War. Now, obviously, I don't think Madison could foresee any of that, but his argument was basically just to try and convince anti-federalists that it's really the states that created this new Constitution. Then he goes through and looks at the power of the president and says, well, here's the power of the president. The president is actually going to be selected by the Electoral College. So it's not all based upon popular vote. Will be selected by the Electoral College. Who sends the electors to the Electoral College? The state legislatures. So state legislatures, you will have a direct role in deciding who is the president. In terms of the Senate, you have a very direct role in that under the original Constitution, members of the Senate were selected by state legislatures as opposed to being popularly elected. So state legislatures, you decide who's in the Senate. Now, he kind of throws his hands up at the House and says, okay, that's elected by popular vote. So that's a little bit more national, but the president and Senate, those have more federal elements to them. How do we amend the Constitution? Well, when we amend the Constitution, no amendment can be added to the Constitution until it is first ratified by the states. So states, you get to serve as the gatekeepers on how we change and amend this Constitution. How does the Constitution go into effect? Through the ratification by the states. So basically, he answers this question, is it national or federal, by saying it is neither. It is a combination of the two, leaning more toward the federal side. So he's assuring them that state governments will not be dominated by this new national government. They will retain their sovereignty. They will retain their power. So that's one way in which they convince the anti-federalists to ratify Constitution through these 85 Federalist Papers. Then the other way is by immediately amending the Constitution with the Bill of Rights. As we all know, the Bill of Rights comprised of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. What a lot of people don't remember is that there were supposed to be 12 amendments in the Bill of Rights. 2 of the 12 amendments did not get ratified by enough states to become part of the new Constitution. One of those amendments, which was supposed to be the first amendment to the Constitution, would limit the size of House districts to 50,000 residents. Now, that did not get ratified, and it's probably a good thing that didn't get ratified, because if that would have gotten ratified as the First Amendment to the Constitution, and we had House districts at 50,000 population, the current size of the House of Representatives would be north of about 4,300 members. We now have 435. We would have over 10 times as many if that would have been ratified. So imagine how difficult it would be. We know how difficult it is to get Congress to agree to anything now. Imagine if he had over 4,300 members. Then what was supposed to be the Second Amendment to the Constitution was written by James Madison, and that amendment would make sure that Congress could not increase its pay until there is an intervening election. So Congress, you want to get paid more, you have to stand for re-election first. That one also didn't get ratified by the number of states necessary. However, it finally did get ratification as the 27th Amendment to the Constitution back in 1992. So, an amendment that was written by James Madison in 1790 ended up actually getting ratified over 200 years later in 1992. But the 10 amendments that did get ratified were all there to try and mitigate the concerns of the Anti-Federalists about having too strong of a national government. And we're familiar with a lot of those freedoms that were provided in the Bill of Rights, whether they be freedom of speech and press and religion and assembly in the First Amendment, right to bear arms in the Second Amendment, protection against quartering of soldiers in the Third Amendment, and so on and so on. As we cover the Constitution next week, we will go through those 10 amendments and we'll talk about how important they are for our work as public administrators. Because as public administrators, we need to understand what those constitutional rights are and endeavor not to violate those rights in the Bill of Rights. And I see we are out of time, so we're going to have to stop it there for tonight. We'll pick up this discussion next week. So at the beginning of class next week, we'll pick up our discussion with the idea of power. If our Constitution and our system of government is all predicated upon the limitation of governmental power, we should have a pretty good idea of what power really is. So we'll talk about power in public administration. We'll then move our discussion into a discussion of federalism and how the division of power across the different levels of government has evolved over the past 250 years. And we'll talk about that. Then, once we're done with that, we'll talk about what this means for public administration. We'll go through very briefly the Constitution. And then, with the remainder of our time next week, we'll get into a discussion of accountability in the public sector. So, we'll pick this discussion up at the beginning of class next week. In our last minute together, please remember you have the initial skills self-assessment that is due next week, as well as Canvas number 1, where you will revisit Madison's argument in Federalist Paper number 10 and decide if we are more factionalized today than you think we were in Madison's time, and what recommendations do you have for us in trying to control the effects of these different groups and these different factions in today's society. So that's it for tonight. Do you have any questions or clarifications on any of this information that we have covered? Okay. I will have this recording up on our Canvas site by tomorrow morning, and it'll include what Kelly Janicek covered in the first half of class tonight. So you can hold on to that link for your future classes to help you in terms of doing research, your future research assignments. So I'll have that up by tomorrow morning. Any questions, last second questions you have on the initial skills self-assessment or the Canvas essay, please just shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer any of those questions. Otherwise, I will see you again then next Tuesday, and we'll pick up our discussion with power in government and public administration. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and I will talk to you next Tuesday.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Have a good night.
Thank
Thank
you. Have a
you.
good night.